Hey, it's Katie, and welcome back to my booktube channel. For today's video, I will be doing my August wrap-up, and this month I read 15 books and like 5,500 pages, which is the most I've read in a few months now, and I'm really glad to be back into the groove of things and to be reading this much again. And I read so many great books this month. I bought myself a ton of books, which you've probably seen in the 2 book hauls that I've put out this month, and I was able to read so many books at the top of my TBR because of that. So most of these books are like 4 or 5 star reads, and I do have full reviews of all of these on my Goodreads account, which is linked below for you guys. But for now, let's jump into it. The first book I read in August was Float Plan by Trish Dollar, and this book was way more emotional than I was expecting. The reason I picked this one up from the library is because this seemed like such a cute, like, summer read, and it did have some summery vibes for sure, but it was way more emotional than I was expecting, and you should definitely check out the trigger warnings before reading this. But I think I really liked this. I gave it 4 stars. This feels like forever ago because I've read so many amazing books since I've read this one as well. But from what I remember, I think our main character is dealing with the loss of her fiance, and she decides that they were going to go on this trip in this boat, and even though he's gone, she decided she needs to pick herself up and go on this trip and try to find a way to cope with the loss of her fiance. And so she goes on this trip, but she can't really sail by herself, so she ends up getting some help, and he has his own issues of his own, and from what I can remember, I think he only has one leg, and he has to deal with that. All he wants to do is help sail, and a lot of people don't think he's capable of doing that. So they're both dealing with their own issues, and they kind of help heal each other in a way. From what I remember, this is a very like easy breezy read, and I wrote down that it was comforting, but based on the synopsis, I can't really remember why I thought it was comforting. I just think it's because there's so much self-growth in this, and there's definitely a lot of like heartbreak that they have to go through, but in the end, I think they end up healing, and I think it's just beautiful because it's very raw and realistic. The next book I picked up was Radha and Jay's Recipe for Romance by Nisha Sharma, and I gave this one 2 stars, so I think I kind of like blocked it out of my memory because I don't remember too much about it. All I remember is that it's pitched as To All the Boys I've Loved Before meets World of Dance. So it's definitely like a contemporary romance. It has a lot of dance in it, which I love, and also has some cooking elements in it. There's also some interesting family dynamics with both of our main characters. And other than that, I don't remember too much. I remember disliking it because there was a ton of miscommunication, which is one of my least favorite things to find in books. I hate when there's so much drama or like a fight between characters when it could be fixed with a simple conversation. It just really frustrates me for some reason. And also, I thought the romance just was super quick and a little messy, and romance is something I love in books, so I was really disappointed in that element as well. After that, I picked up Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson, which is one of my most anticipated books that I've read this month, and I really enjoyed this one. I even went and bought the sequel pretty soon after. But for those of you that don't know what this book's about and haven't seen it on BookTok, this follows Princess Leia, who basically is raised in this society with a whole bunch of rules and expectations for her, and she is basically supposed to marry this guy. It's supposed to be like, you know, one of those marriages where like 2 kingdoms put their heirs together and they get married for like peace and all that stuff. I don't really know how to describe that. The synopsis probably will do a better job. But she basically has this arranged marriage to this guy that she's never met, and she wants nothing to do with it, so she runs away, and before she runs, she actually steals some very important documents as well, and so she is being chased by people, and she ends up moving to this little village where she tries to blend in and work and just be one of the normal citizens so nobody can find her. But while she's there, she meets these two mysterious strangers. One of them is an assassin sent to kill her, and the other is the guy that she was supposed to marry, and she has no idea. So obviously there's an interesting like triangle between the three of them and some drama that goes down, and I really enjoyed it. I thought the world building was really good, and also it was so cool just the dynamic between those three characters, especially because this book is told from all three of their perspectives, but you are never told which character is the assassin and which one is the prince she was supposed to marry. So the whole time you're trying to figure it out right along with Princess Leia, and it's just, I think it was just done so well. And there were parts of it that were a little bit boring for me because it was a lot of like trekking through the woods, which is never my favorite part of books, but I think it was worth it because the overall plot points were really enjoyable, and the ending left me really wanting to know what was going to happen next, which is why I went out and got the sequel. This next book was one of my favorites this month, and that is A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. So basically, in this world, we have a treaty that took place thousands of years ago, and now every century, the Elf King comes to choose a human from this village to be his human queen. And Luella, our main character, is from that village, and to be chosen as the human queen is basically a mark of death, and Luella thinks that she has escaped it until one day the Elf King comes for her. Everything Luella thought she knew about herself was a lie, and she's swept away to this mysterious kingdom and forced to be the queen to this cold and handsome king, and she basically is torn between the two worlds that she's a part of. My favorite part of this book was definitely the world building. It is just so amazing, and there's like a balance between the kingdom where the elves are and where Luella is from, and I can't even do it justice with trying to explain it to you guys, but just the magic and the balance between those two places is just so intricate, and it's done so well, and I loved learning more and more about this world. I was not ready to leave it. This is a standalone, which I did not say before, but Elise Kova, like literally a few days after I read this, came out with a companion novel to this book that takes place in the same world, so I will definitely be reading that one. That one is called A Dance with the Fae Prince, and I can't wait because I need more of this world. Also, I should probably say the romance in this is great as well. It's like an arranged marriage slash like marriage of convenience, and it's really good. It's a slow burn, and it takes them a very long time to break through the ice that's between them, and I definitely recommend this to you guys. Up next, we have It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, which is probably my favorite book that I read this month. I had never read a Colleen Hoover book until this one, and this book wrecked me. Like, I can't even put into words the way that this book made me feel. It made me sob. It broke me. It put me in a reading slump for a few days, but maybe not a slump. I had a book hangover from this book. It was so good. To this day, every time I think about it or see this cover, I just get like overwhelmed with emotions. It was just so amazing and heartbreaking and raw and honest, and I'm smiling, but I think I'm just smiling through the pain because it still hurts my soul, but I love every bit of this book, and if you're hesitating to read this, please don't. You should definitely pick it up. Also, make sure you do check out the trigger warnings first. It does involve domestic violence, so it's important to know that before going into the story because that plays a huge role, but it's just so good, and I'm so glad I finally picked up a Colleen Hoover book. I have 2 more in my collection that I should read, but I just can't put this into words. I did a full review of It Ends With Us on this channel as well, so I will link that for you guys, and I also do have a full review of A Deal with the Elf King, which I will also link for you guys. This next one was actually one of the more disappointing books that I read this month, and that was Chasing Lucky by Jen Bennett. I had high hopes for this because I really enjoyed Jen Bennett books in the past, but this one just didn't quite do it for me. This one follows a girl who has always moved from place to place with her mom, and she ends up moving back to their New England hometown to take over their family bookstore. And while she's there, she bumps into the boy that she used to be friends with, but she kind of left in a hurry without saying goodbye. So now he wants nothing to do with her, and he's kind of the town bad boy. But something happens at this pool party, and he jumps in to take the blame for her, and she has no idea why. So she kind of won't leave him alone and just wants to know why he did that if he claims that he does not care about her. And it was enjoyable. I think it is a cute book, but it seemed to be geared toward a younger YA audience, which those books just don't quite work for me anymore, especially since I've started reading some adult romance. So it just really wasn't for me. It did involve some like complicated family dynamics, which were kind of interesting, and also obviously a second chance romance, but overall this one was just kind of average for me. After that, I picked up A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair, which is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and I really, really enjoyed this one. It was everything I hoped it would be and more. It was really cool because this involves like classic mythological elements and a ton of characters you'll recognize from Greek mythology, which was my favorite part by far. But also it takes place in the modern world. I think that's called an urban fantasy. I don't know too much about genres, but it's done so well that like you don't really need to have a mythology background. Everything you need is in this book, but it's just so cool to see all of the gods and goddesses that I loved learning about growing up, and the romance was obviously really, really great. The romance definitely gave me touch her and I'll kill you vibes, which is one of my favorite tropes, especially in fantasies. So that was great, and I really enjoyed the world building like I was saying. This definitely has a good amount of smut in it, and it feels like the relationship between Hades and Persephone was kind of driven more by that than anything else. So I probably didn't enjoy their romance as much as I would another romance, because I always like there to be something extra and not just be driven by the smut. But it was still really good and definitely a great read. I probably won't be continuing the series though, because I read some reviews of the rest of the series, and I think a lot of people say that they just kind of like forget about plot in those other books and it's just all smut, which is fine, but that's not really what I'm looking for. And also the type of smut that they said was in those books is also not really what I'm looking for. So I think I will just have fond memories of this one and just leave it at that. The next book I read was Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, and this was one that was at the top of my TBR for a while, and I'm really glad that I finally got the chance to read it. It's actually my second Penelope Douglas book, and I've enjoyed both of them, so if you have any other Penelope Douglas recommendations, please leave them in the comments below. But this one basically follows Ryan and Misha, who were paired up as pen pals in 5th grade, and they wrote each other letters for like 7 years, I think. And they had 3 rules, which were that they were never to, I think, find each other on social media, never to meet up in person, and to never exchange phone numbers. So they were only communicating through their letters, and that was it. But then Misha ends up finding a picture of her online and putting all the clues together based on what they used to write each other in their letters, and he decides he has to meet her, but he ends up hating what he finds, so he stops writing to her, and she has no idea that this happened. All she knows is that he stopped writing to her, and she has no idea why, and she's obviously very hurt. So this is told from both of their perspectives, I believe, and I really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting there to be so much smut. I don't know why. It's a Penelope Douglas book. I should have known that there would be smut, but for some reason it caught me off guard because the synopsis feels really innocent. But there is some spice in here, so definitely if you enjoy that, this book will be for you. But I love this because it is the trope of like, I hate everyone in the world, especially you, and that's another one of my favorite romance tropes, and I'm so glad I finally read another book that fits that. But it was really enjoyable, and I just remember the characters being very raw and honest, and that's not something I find in a lot of books, but they both made mistakes of their own and had a lot of things to work through, but it was just such an interesting dynamic between them, and I really, really enjoyed it. I followed up Punk 57 with another adult romance, which was Vicious by LJ Shen, and this one is like a bully high school romance, but takes place, I think, like 10 years later or something. So in this book, you get time jumps between 10 years ago when they first met in high school and the present where they are reconnecting and bumped into each other again. So I really enjoyed that element because you get to see the foundation of their relationship and why they feel the way they feel now. And you also get to watch them build a relationship in the present. This one honestly was super toxic and messed up, but I loved every second of it. But I definitely think you should probably be at least 18 to read this one, only because of how toxic the relationship was, and definitely it's not healthy, but it was still a very enjoyable read for me. But our main character, Vicious, was very, very mean to Amelia for sure. So if that's not something you're into in a romance, I would probably avoid this one, but I definitely enjoyed it. There's a lot of like tragic backstory elements to this as well. He definitely is like a tortured soul and has gone through a lot and done some pretty messed up things. So it definitely gives me like, I don't want to say it gives me Wattpad vibes because I feel like that comes across in a wrong way, but all the books I used to love on Wattpad, I loved for some of the reasons that this book also has. So it was really enjoyable for me, but definitely for a particular audience, I would say. After that, I decided to jump back into some fantasy, so I ended up rereading Daughter of the Pirate King by Trisha Levenseller, and this was my second time reading this book this year. But I love Trisha Levenseller's work. I've raved about her before, but this book still lived up to everything I thought it was and more. It's one of my favorite series, I would say, and it's just so good. For those of you that don't know, this is a pirate book, and our main character, Alosa, is the daughter of the Pirate King, which I'm sure you could guess from the title, but basically, she's sent on this mission by her father to be intentionally captured by enemy pirates so that she can sneak out of the cell and search their ship while they're sleeping because he needs her to find a missing piece of a map. So she does. She ends up getting captured, and everything is going as planned except for the first mate, Raiden. And obviously there is some romance there, and it's so good. The banter between them is amazing. It's definitely like a slow burn romance. There's so much intensity in like the action scenes. Alosa is this badass heroine, and she's written so well, and it's just such a fun read, and I love the pirate vibes. This was the only pirate book that I've ever read, and it's just done so well. After rereading Daughter of the Pirate King, I had to go and pick up the sequel, Daughter of the Siren Queen, and I'm so glad I did. This duology, like I said, is one of my favorites, and this book did not disappoint. I was kind of worried going into this because of how the last book ended that there wouldn't be enough like tension between Alosa and Raiden, but I ended up really loving it. It was still definitely a slow burn romance, and it kept me on the edge of my seat. There's still amazing like action scenes. That's one of my favorite elements, like the banter between all the pirates and the action scenes. But what I really loved about this one is that we got to know Alosa's crew so much better. I recognized a bunch of names from the first book, but we get to know them on a much deeper level, and I cared about them so much. I was so worried for all of them throughout this book, and I just love how Trisha Levenseller can make me care about these characters like more than anything else. Another romance I read this month was The Score by Elle Kennedy, which is book 3 in the Off-Campus series. And the Off-Campus series is essentially a series of these hockey romances that take place in like the same friend group in college. And I love it because, especially since this is book 3, we get to kind of go back and see the relationships that I read about in like the first 2 books and kind of see where they're at now, which was one of my favorite elements of this book for sure. This book follows Dean, who is definitely a player, and our other main character, Allie, she just got out of this long-term relationship and she's heartbroken and decides that she needs a rebound, so they end up sleeping together, and it definitely like sparks something between them, and Allie is in denial, but Dean is like, no, like, we're gonna be together, and he will do anything possible to make that happen. I honestly really enjoy books like this. I really like when somebody who's a player like Dean finds a girl and all of a sudden he doesn't really think about any other hookups. She's like all he can think about. And this book definitely had that element. And also the hockey elements are so cool. I love books with sports in them, so that also did not disappoint. Next, I read Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy, and I really, really enjoyed this one as well, which I keep saying, but I read some amazing books this month. This one is about bone criers, as you can probably tell from the title, but their duty is to ferry spirits to the afterlife. But in order to become a bone crier, the gods demand the ultimate sacrifice, and for Elise, that means she needs to kill the boy she's destined to love. We also get two other perspectives, and another perspective we get is Bastien, and his father was murdered by a bone crier when he was younger, so he is basically set on getting revenge, and he ends up stumbling across the ritual that Elise is doing to find her soulmate, and they end up with their fates entwined. And the third perspective we get is Sabine, who is Elise's best friend, and she's never really had the stomach for what the bone criers do, but when she finds out what happened between Elise and Bastien, she will do whatever it takes to break their bond because she really wants to save her friend. This book was on my TBR for over a year, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. It was so good. I feel like the world building was really great, and also I expected this to be high fantasy, but it actually wasn't. I feel like it had elements of high fantasy, but, well, I guess that's just a fantasy. It was more of an urban fantasy than I thought it would be because a decent chunk of this book takes place in the catacombs, which I was not expecting. And also that's usually an element I don't appreciate in books. Like when they take place underground, I find that really weird. Ever since the book in the Shadow and Bone trilogy that had a lot of underground scenes, that wasn't really something I appreciated. So I thought I would kind of hate that element, but it was done really well. I do wish those scenes were a little more scarce, but it is what it is. I think the relationship between these characters was really well done. I really liked it. There were some great battle scenes, but the main part of this book that was really interesting was everything we learn about the bone criers. I could not get enough of the information we were finding out. The details were so cool. I don't really want to spoil anything because it's just so fun to go on this journey of learning about like the kind of the mythology behind it, honestly. Like why they do these things for certain gods and like what's expected of them, how their powers work, all that kind of stuff. It's just done so well, and that was definitely my favorite element. The last two books I read this month, I actually read on my new Kindle Paperwhite. I bought this a little bit after my birthday, and I'm so glad that I did. I've always wanted a Kindle, and I'm glad that I can finally read a bunch of ebooks. I also got Kindle Unlimited, so please leave all your suggestions in the comments below. I cannot get enough of Kindle Unlimited. I think I just got this like 2 days ago, honestly, and I've already read 2 books off of it, so I would love some recommendations. But the first book I read was Defy the Night by Brigid Kemmerer, which I actually got the ARC of, and I'm really excited I got this ARC. I really did not expect to get it. I feel like this book is so popular. Brigid Kemmerer is the author of A Curse So Dark and Lonely, if you have read that series. But this book comes out, I think, September 15th or somewhere around there. But it should be coming out in the next couple weeks, and it is so good. Basically, Defy the Night takes place in this kingdom where there is a sickness, like, ravaging everything, and they have this medication, but obviously not everybody can afford it, and so it's kind of like Robin Hood inspired. I don't know if it really is, but that's what it reminded me of, where our main characters basically are finding a way to steal some of the medicine and provide it to those who cannot afford it. So we have that element. Basically, this kingdom is there's a lot of corruption in it. And then one of the perspectives we have is the prince who's trying to hold it all together. The other perspective is the girl I was telling you about who's trying to bring it all crashing down. So we have these conflicting like viewpoints, and we have like royalty, which is amazing, but the main element of this book is political intrigue, which I know a lot of people really enjoy. I never thought that I was somebody that enjoyed political intrigue. I've read a couple books with it and didn't really like it, but I loved it in this book. This was literally one of my favorite elements. It was just done so well. I couldn't put it down. I read this book in one sitting and it was 500 pages. Like, I could not put this book down. And it was just so cool to see what the prince was going through, what the king was going through, having all these people asking him for aid, and like the expectations people had for them, and not really knowing who could be trusted and who couldn't. And it was just so many elements that I really, really enjoyed. Also, there is romance in this book, and it was really enjoyable. I was totally here for it, but it definitely takes a back seat to all of the political intrigue and the rest of the plot, which usually I would be disappointed in, but I was definitely here for it in this book. It was done so well, and just the world building and everything else in this book just captivated me so much that I didn't even find myself missing the romance. Also, the romance is friends to enemies to lovers. At least that's how I would describe it. So if that's something you'd be interested in, definitely check this one out in a few weeks. I really think you guys will like it. I'm still so shocked that I was able to read an arc of this. I did not expect it. But it's just so good. So please go check it out in a few weeks, or pre-order it. But I really enjoyed it. This is one of my favorite books that I read this month. Last but not least, the final book I read in August was Ruckus by L.J. Shen, which is the second book in the Sinners of Saints series, and I believe the companion novel or sequel to Vicious. I'm not sure if it's a companion novel or a sequel. I would say companion novel because it does follow different characters, but we do still get to see Vicious and Amelia. So I always love that when we have these companion novels, but you get to go back and also see the characters that we fell in love with in previous books. I think that's so cool. But this book follows Rosie, who was Amelia's sister, and also Dean, who is friends with Vicious. So we did get to see some of the chemistry between them in a way in the first book, and it was so fun to see it again. This one is really interesting because, again, we get those flashbacks from like 10, 11 years ago and the present. So you really get to see all of the angst kind of and the tension between them when they were younger and how much they cared about each other then and they still care about each other now. And this one was a much sweeter story than Vicious for sure. A lot less toxic, and Dean was just so sweet, and he cared about Rosie so much and would do anything to be with her and protect her, and I loved every second of it. I loved watching him like chase her, and he basically viewed her as like his whole world, and I just think it was so sweet. I just finished it before this video, so my emotions are still very fresh, but it was done so well. And also Rosie does have cystic fibrosis, I think is what it was. So there is rep for that, and it's just, I think it's done really well. Again, I am not somebody that experiences that, so I guess I can't technically say that for myself, but I always love when books have representation like that because I like to learn as much as possible. So I think it's really cool when authors have characters with rep like that. And it was just done so well. I was so emotionally connected to them, and I was definitely rooting for their relationship. It was a slow burn romance. There was some really great smut, and it was probably one of my favorite books I've read this month as well. I keep saying that, but I know I definitely loved it more than Vicious, so it's my favorite one from that series for now. Those are all the books that I read in August. Thank you guys for sticking out this video with me. I know it was a long one, but I hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It would literally make my day. And if you do subscribe, please click the notification bell so you know when I upload next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in my next video.